Radio 418.
What's up, beautiful people? This is John Montagna, and you're listening to Radio 418. Thank you so much for checking in on the podcast again. This is my show where I talk to my fellow musicians about the life in music. And this is another archive episode, bringing back a conversation from the previous podcast feed to the new one. And this is my talk with Steve Jenkins, bass guitarist, composer, educator. Great guy, lives at the intersection of rock and jazz and funk, electronic music. What is it? What does he play? What do you call this stuff? I don't know. We had this conversation. Tried to get to the bottom of it. You know it when you hear it. And I wanted to learn more about where he's from and what he's about. So back in October, he came by, sat down on the couch next to Luba, the podcast puppy, and we had a great conversation that I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes. There's no business to take care of on this episode, but I did want to acknowledge David Zabludowski, bassist, who you might know. David was the bassist for Adrenaline Mob, and he worked with TSO, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. As you might know, David was killed in a horrific accident on the road with Adrenaline Mob. And I didn't know David personally. He's from New York. He's from our area. And I know some people that knew him. A couple of friends in common. But you know what? He's a bassist. He's a fellow Spectre bass guitars artist. And so he's a brother, you know. I don't have much to say about it other than, you know, all of us are on the same team. All of us are fighting the same fight in this business. We get the itinerary, we hit the road, we get in the vehicle, we drive around from city to city, and if we make it through all the dates and play all the shows and come back home safely, it's a victory, right? And so when one of us goes down like this, it hurts all of us. All of us feel it, even if it's not somebody that we know personally, even if it's not music that we're familiar with. You know, I heard about that accident and I thought, man, I've been in that situation. I've been pulled over on the side of the road waiting for a vehicle to get repaired with a show that night. I've been there. You've been there. All of us have been there. So you can't help but feel something, you know? And I want to send my love and my prayers to Russell Allen and Mike Orlando and Jordan Kanata, the other members of Adrenaline Mob. I want to send my love to Jane Train, the tour manager. They're all recovering from physical injuries, and no doubt they're going to be recovering emotionally and spiritually in the coming weeks and months with our help, with the community's help, the fellow musicians and the public. But say a prayer for David Z, who by all accounts was a gem of a dude and a phenomenal player. I've been listening to some Adrenaline Mob music, and it's great stuff. So maybe you want to go on Amazon or something and buy their latest CD, We the People. I'm not really sure what else to say about that, but just hug your loved ones tight. That's really all I have to say about that. I want to get on to my conversation with Steve Jenkins. Again, very interesting musical ecosystem that this guy is in. And, you know, Vernon Reid, Cindy Blackman, John Scofield, John Medeski, Screaming Headless Torsos, The Roots. He makes the rounds, man, with some very creative individuals. Got a great CD called Steve Jenkins and the Coaxial Flutter that he gifted me with when he came over here for the conversation, and I just listened to it again this morning. It's tremendous. You know what? I did this on the original episode. Rather than try to talk him up and explain it, let's just get right into my conversation with him. And you can decide for yourself what you want to call what he does. This is Steve Jenkins.
Radio 418.
You were just out of town, right? You just got back?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in an interesting place because I'm moving in January. After
Oh,
12
really?
years. Yeah.
Where are you moving to?
L.A.
Really?
Yeah, moving to L.A.
Really? What precipitated that?
Well, I think it's mostly I just wanted to try to do some different things.
Okay.
And it's kind of like reshuffling the cards.
All right.
It's not predicated on some kind of ill feelings towards New York. I think
Okay.
it's just more like, well, I've reset New York a few times.
I understand.
And yeah, I just kind of feel like now would be a good time to explore. It was kind of a perfect storm of events because what had happened was I'd moved around a lot. I think I have my batch from every neighborhood in Brooklyn.
Right.
I never lived in Queens.
Are you from here originally?
No, I'm from Washington, D.C. area, Maryland.
So when did you come to New York?
Well, I basically moved to New York at the fall of 2004.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've been here a while.
All right.
And from, at that point I was moving from Boston.
Okay.
So I had just
you were at Berkeley, you teaching up there, or
well, I was finishing up, and then I hung around there for a couple years.
Okay.
But the plan was always to make it to New York.
Okay.
It took me a while to do that, but I eventually did, and yeah, I had a pretty good run, I guess.
Yeah.
In the 12 years I was around.
Sure.
But I just got to a point where I wanted to try some different stuff.
All right.
But, it's the sort of thing where I have projects here and people I play with here. I'm not abandoning that.
Right.
It's just everybody's juggling stuff, as you know. It's like,
yeah.
It's just sort of, we're all juggling knives.
That's
basically.
right.
That's how I look at it. So
that's a really good way to describe it.
That's that's
right.
pretty much what I tell people. Like I'm single. So when I meet women, they're like, well, what is it like? And it's like, it's juggling knives.
That's it. Right. Right.
I try to just enjoy the small victories now. Yesterday I have a band with Bob Lanzetti from Snarky Puppy and this drummer named Devin Collins, and there's a cool venue. I'm not really sure. I guess it's Bed-Stuy. This place called Come On Everybody, and
I've heard of Come On Everybody.
It's a cool little room. There's actually a place next door, and I don't remember what it's called, but there's like a taco truck that's parked out in back of this bar, and the guy who cooks there is from Austin, so it's probably like the best tacos I've had in the city. And I used to live kind of near Sunset Park, so I've had those, and those are great too. But
beautiful.
This place is pretty happening. I was impressed.
So it's the whole package.
But the whole thing was that club, as nice as it is, there was nothing about Backline on their website. And I guess there was a couple bands, and we're all friends, so we just assumed that there'd be like a shared backline situation.
Something.
We found out the bass amp was blown, so it was just scrambling to basically find something to play out of for a gig that wasn't going to pay that much, but was fun to do.
Interesting.
They're not all like that, but
no, they're not all like that. But
I think there's still a lot of gigs I do just for the love of playing, and not so much just.
Well, sure. Yeah, you have to. Otherwise, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes. All right, I'm just gonna come right out at the outset and just say I know very little about you.
That's fine.
So I'm apologizing in advance for so tell me about this thing that you're doing with so-and-so. And you'd be like, okay. So you're from Maryland originally?
Yeah.
What kind of place is that to grow up in?
Well, what's cool about where I grew up is it's basically a suburb of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So my father worked for ABC News and my mom was a teacher. And
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
what did he do for ABC News?
He was a lighting engineer.
Really?
So he's kind of like I mean, the media's changed a lot, but for younger listeners, like the 70s and 80s, before digital, before we all had cameras in our pocket and video cameras in our pocket and the ability to create media and publish media for all the world to see.
Right.
You know, the way the news worked then was like you had these people that people watched every night, like Sam Donaldson, Ted Koppel, like Peter Jennings, people of that ilk. And basically you'd watch, they'd give you the news. And
they were like the trusted voices.
Yeah. You know. So a lot of these conglomerates would get certain times to cover stuff at the White House. Right. And a lot of what made make or break for a lot of these newscasters was just how they looked on the screen. Like, you know, the thing is, like, the lighting really did a lot to either enhance or conceal stuff. So, so this is pre-high def TV too. Right.
So did he work at a specific studio, like in Washington?
He traveled a lot. So he was with ABC News, and he kind of worked from the Washington DC division. Okay. But he did a lot of stuff where he would work on the White House, and you know, he traveled all over the world. Like he went to Europe and he witnessed
setting up like remote shots and stuff.
Yeah. So So anyway, what a lot of people did, I guess, what people do here too. They live 20 minutes out of the city and they commute. So what was cool about that as a young person growing up, was that proximity to a great city was very much present. Right. So,
but you weren't living in it.
No. Okay. No, but it was close enough. And it was the kind of thing where it wasn't a hard it wasn't a hard excursion to make to get into town, and it wasn't hard to get there and access things. And I felt like as a younger person, especially in high school, because I wasn't really into what a lot of kids are into in high school, it was kind of a good experience just to be able to go and like watch concerts and just kind of.
I was going to say, you going into the city, that would be DC proper. Yeah. And you're going to see music, you're going to see bands?
Yeah, going to see music and bands, a lot of punk rock shows, because stuff was like pretty accessible.
Were you into punk rock? Was that your thing?
Not so much. I mean, a little bit. There's a couple bands, like it's hard to be from that area and not like a band like Fugazi. Sure. And Bad Brains, even though Bad Brains wasn't super active, they've always had a really erratic presence as like a live entity, but they're from DC. And then you also have like Go-Go Music, which is sort of, it's like an amazing funk based type music.
Yeah. I've only started hearing about Go-Go recently. I just got this book called The Last Miles.
Oh, and
it's like a giant book about the last 10 years of Miles' life.
So he had Ricky Wellman on drums.
Yeah.
And he was like a go-go drummer.
Right. And they started talking about this go-go thing. I'm like, what? Yeah. What is that? It was like a whole other thing I knew nothing about. What's the essence of that?
Well, I would have to, I'll give you some links. It's hard. I can't. Okay. My mouth percussion game is not strong. but it's very slow. It's a slow loping kind of thing. And there's some producers that definitely let some of that influence creep into their tracks. Like there was this track from a few years ago by Amory called One Thing, which kind of had a go-go feel to it. Okay. I'm trying to think of who else had some of it, but Jill Scott had a song called It's Love. Okay. And I think that's as far north as go-go traveled because she's from Philly.
Got it. Okay.
But it's not something that really busted out. On a national level.
It was a very kind of small thing. I mean, as you can see, I mean, I knew nothing about it.
Yeah, there was a drummer at Berkeley that actually he sent me home with like $100 in cash. And he was like, "Buy me all the go-go tapes you can get and CDs." And I was like, "All right, man."
This is back when you'd have styles of music and sort of movements that were local, that were regional. Yeah. Okay, so when did music first hit you as the thing that you felt like you wanted to do?
I was 4. I saw Kiss on TV.
All right.
Like Phantom of the Park. That was like Kiss and Star Wars. That was a really heavily influential thing for me, both of those things. And I think I don't even know if I thought about it as a job. I just thought it was awesome.
Right.
But I would say when I got really serious about music in general was when I was in third grade and I got Purple Rain on vinyl. Prince was like a really big influence for me, even though I don't play necessarily that kind of music all the time. Like I definitely have a lot of funk and R&B in my DNA, but Prince, you know, and especially like the end of Purple Rain with the strings, which I'm not sure if he did or Claire Fisher did, but it just struck me that this guy is like a complete musician.
Well, you know what? Not to cut you off, but whether he or Claire Fisher did it, Prince put it out there.
Yeah.
You heard it through Prince.
Yeah.
So who did the arrangement is irrelevant.
Right.
It was Prince was the conduit that got it to you.
Right.
It's my opinion, but
yeah.
I mean, I was not a Prince fan. I mean, we're probably like roughly the same age.
Yeah, I just turned 41. So.
Okay, I'm 44. So I was 12 when Purple Rain was all over the friggin' place.
Right.
And I was not a fan.
No.
But I couldn't escape. I mean, now I am. But at the time, I just was sort of like, okay, whatever. But it was inescapable.
Yeah.
You couldn't be alive in that. It seems to me that you could not be alive in that time without being hit by that stuff. But I could, so conceptually, he was hitting you with something.
Yeah, conceptually. And the thing is, I didn't know that much about his musicianship. I just knew that based on what I'd seen from the videos, he was a great guitar player.
Well, there was a ton of imagery, and it was like a lot of extreme visuals, and just a lot of stuff going on there to take in.
He was so keyed into that part that I think a lot of people weren't even aware how he had the goods.
Right, it was easy to bypass.
Yeah.
It was easy to overlook the musicality behind it. So, did you go straight to bass?
Well, my older brother had electric guitars lying around.
Okay.
And not so much. Like I played piano for a while.
Okay.
And I liked piano just because it was something I could mess around with, but it wasn't necessarily my favorite instrument because I think I was listening to a lot of guitar-based stuff.
Okay.
And I just didn't feel like piano rocked as much as other stuff. I mean,
so
I like it.
You knew that you had the desire to rock a little bit.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like drums and I like guitar, and so for initially though it was piano and trumpet and bass. Out of dumb luck, really, I chose bass because I couldn't decide between guitar or drums, and I really didn't know that much about what bass's function was. I just knew that, it was weird. Like I heard a lot of music as a kid. When I was really into Kiss as like a 4-year-old, I used to mess around with the radio, and there was a radio station called like KYS 93 Kiss FM.
Okay.
And I thought it was Kiss's radio station. And I was like, wow, these guys. So I didn't totally know that they had, like, I didn't know all their music.
Right.
But Kiss FM was like funk and disco music.
Right.
So I heard a lot of
We had a Kiss
stuff.
FM in New York too, but it was KISS.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Kiss FM, and it was the same thing. It was like,
So I didn't.
R&B station.
Yeah, I just didn't understand that it wasn't theirs. But I heard a lot of stuff like Nile Rodgers and Chic and Gap Band and Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Stuff that was on the radio in that time. Yeah.
But I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know what some of that stuff was until I started when I was in Boston, like much later when I was paying my rent by doing wedding gigs.
Sure.
Or GB as they call it.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, I know this song. I've heard this song a million times.
Exactly.
So yeah, I feel like maybe that had something to do with it, but I think mostly it was dumb luck. But it was definitely, I would liken my connection with bass kind of like that scene in 2001 where the Neanderthals touched the monolith, and all of a sudden they have this knowledge. Like that's how I feel. Bass happened into my life. It was really it just kind of, I don't know. I don't like when people get all like, oh, it chose me, but that's kind of how it was.
Okay.
Like, I think it just kind of worked out. I was like,
so what happened? You were in a band and they needed a bass player, or what? How did it happen?
That didn't really manifest like that. I think I just wanted to play it, and then from there, I found musicians to play with.
Okay. Did you have a bass? When did you get one?
I got one when I was in, I guess, like end of 7th grade.
Okay.
Or maybe it was end of 8th grade. It was 87 or 88. And
Okay.
basically, I had, I grew up in the suburbs, so I had a lawn cutting job where I would mow people's grass and make money from that, and I'd save a bunch of money. And it was the kind of thing where I was either gonna buy a new skateboard or get a bass. It was very arbitrary. It was kind of even like the night before, I was like, I think I'm gonna get a bass. And that's kind of what it was. There was a music store which doesn't exist anymore, but for a while it was kind of a big retailer type place, and they had this big sale in May every year, and I bought. It was like my first bass was like a Jackson Charvel, which I got for like $250. It was like PJ. It was red. It had like the 80s hair metal headstock.
The sharp. Yeah. That's badass.
Which I think makes sense now because, sometimes things get unruly and you have to be able to protect yourself.
It's nice to be able to, like, when people are rushing the stage, you just like, be like, watch it. Okay, so you get the bass and you're teaching yourself bass lines or what?
Yeah, it was like bass lines. I was listening to a lot of metal at that point.
Okay. Metallica,
like I was still listening to Kiss. I was listening to I hadn't really gotten into stuff like Slayer yet, but it was like I guess the cool thing was this would have been, a couple years after Master of Puppets came out. Yeah. So I don't know, it was kind of exciting. That stuff, I remember the newness of that.
Yeah.
But I was like teaching myself all kinds of stuff, like stuff I always wanted to learn, which somehow didn't take that long. Okay. It was kind of like, oh, cool, I can play Detroit Rock City or War Machine or like one of the Metallica songs like Battery or something like that. It didn't seem that hard, but then, I was also playing with a pick some of the time, and then somehow like I went to a music store. Like that's what would happen. Like basically not being able to drive, but being a kid, take the bus somewhere and go to this music store. I remember I was trying out something and I was playing with a pick, and some guy, I don't know why I listened to him. This is the funny thing. Right. He just,
because you were a kid. And you figured he's older than you and he knows better.
This guy knows. Yeah.
Right.
He just said, look, he's like, if you're going to play bass, you should learn to play with your fingers too. He's like, okay. I think it was a little more weighted on the, no one plays bass with a pick, which is not true, of course.
Absurd.
It is absurd.
But in any case.
But at the point, so he just was like, he's like, look, you should play with 2 fingers, try to do that. Sure. And I don't even know what dude played. I mean, it was like, I think he took the bass away and played like Don't Fear the Reaper or something. He wasn't amazing, but it was just,
he wasn't playing Jocko's version of Donna Lee.
Right, yeah, it wasn't
with his fingers. It was no,
it was really basic, but his presentation game was on. So I was like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Okay, right.
I didn't have a driver's license, and I hadn't really played any gigs. So I think at that point I was really just excited to try to get close to people that were doing things. Sure. Just because I didn't come from a family of musicians, so I didn't have a lot of the stuff. I guess the learning curve from the professional end was a little bit weird because I didn't know.
You weren't surrounded by it as a kid. Yeah.
Like even like my business acumen, when my career was starting to get going, like I don't think it was informed that well by, like, I didn't know like what you're supposed to do. Like I didn't really know how to hustle for gigs. I just knew how to practice and sound good. And
most of us don't. Yeah. Most of us find out like the freaking hard way. Yeah. Much later on. Yeah. If at all. Right. You know what I mean? If we're lucky. All right. So now you're a teenager. Was there a moment where you felt like galvanized as a thing where you're like, you're playing, and then boom. Yeah. Something else that takes you to the whole. What was that for you? Well, yeah, that's a good point, because I think there's always that thing where it happens and you can just have that feeling where you have that realization, I can do this on some level. I think I had learned YYZ or like Free Will or something, like Rush. Like Rush, learning like more challenging bass lines that weren't that took longer to figure out, but it was the kind of thing where I could see if I spent an entire Saturday trying to learn something, by the end of the weekend I could play it. And so
or I was seeing enough results that gave me the indication that I can totally learn how to do this stuff. And I feel like each little thing like that just became like a tiny brick in a bigger structure. I think the other thing that happened was, I think for a lot of people that end up taking lessons, you can get paired with the wrong teacher initially.
Yeah.
Person I studied with was cool. He was really helpful, and he actually set me on a really good path in that he didn't have like a really strict dogma about how you're supposed to play electric bass. He gave me, I guess, what would be now like a playlist, but he gave me a mixtape, and it was all different kinds of bass players, and
who was on there?
Well, it was like kind of your standard fare, like your Jocko stuff, and Stanley, and then like Anthony Jackson.
Yeah. Which Anthony Jackson track did he give you?
Well, there was a few. I mean, there was some Shaka stuff, but then there was also Steve Kahn Eyewitness, and I think it was sort of to illustrate. Well, you can have a lot of depth as a musician. There was like that live bass solo that Billy Sheehan did with Tallis, which that's not even how this dude I was studying with played, but he was I think he was just a fan of the fact that there's all these different ways to play bass. There was, I think, the stuff that really kind of knocked me out are there's like the classic stuff. Like I loved all the Jocko and Stanley stuff, but even now, like the stuff that still baffles me in a lot of ways is like the stuff I heard like Jimmy Johnson playing with Holdsworth, like the way, because he's one of those guys that can kind of play with James Taylor, and he can play he's a very, very consummate bass player, and so just that was sort of the thing I always was drawn to in a way, because I always got into technical stuff, but I always liked stuff that wasn't based around tangible things, like interesting playing that's based on a decision, not based on I spent this much time learning this so I could execute it at this point. Like that, I always dug that, but I always wondered, like, why did Anthony Jackson play his fill here? Right. Or, like on what you're gonna, you know what I'm saying? Like, why did he decide to do that there? Or why did Chuck Rainey decide to do this here? Like that type of stuff, I think, is where like the real interesting elements are.
You went to Berkeley.
Yeah.
We might have overlapped then, right?
It's possible.
I graduated in 94.
Okay, so here's what I did. The thing that kind of messed up my entire high school experience was I did the 5-week thing at Berkeley in between my junior and senior year.
You were one of the campers, as we used to call them.
Yeah, and it was great. I loved it. It was a transformative experience. It was an interesting summer being a high school kid, mostly unsupervised in a city. Right.
Were you in the dorms for that? Which dorm were you in?
150.
You were in 150. Okay. Yeah. I had just moved out of 150 at that point.
150 was kind of an interesting place. I spent time, like in college, I lived in 150. Okay. I kind of wish I had done 270 Commonwealth, because it seemed like a lot of kids over there, they had a different vibe going.
There was definitely a different vibe over there, because it was away from the action. You weren't living in the same building as like your half of your classes and the cafeteria and the recording studio. Yeah. It was all like in one complex. ComAv people seemed a little more independent.
Yeah, they didn't have to be tethered to it. I guess my rationale was like, if I oversleep, I can just walk out the door.
Oh, well, dude, I gained like 15 or 20 pounds my first month, because it was just like rolling out of bed, eating some Cocoa Puffs, and going to class. Right. Whereas going to music and art in the city, I was walking through, taking the subway every day. But
you went with Tobias Ralph, right?
I went with Tobias.
Yeah, I just rehearsed with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're doing some stuff Thursday and then Monday.
Oh, where?
We're playing a bill with Teddy Kumpel's Lupustra at the New Jersey Prague House. Okay. And I think it's Dunellen, New Jersey. Okay. But by the time people hear it, that gig will probably be done. So, and then we're playing at Rockwood on Monday night.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, so it's just, yeah, it's interesting how that whole thing kind of affected my view of school after it. Like, I just wanted to get out and go to Berkeley, you know?
Okay.
But it's weird because now my opinion of like the music education thing, it's changed a bit.
Right, because you teach up there now too, right?
Well, I teach sometimes in the summer.
Okay.
I've done this summer thing that's usually like a few days just for bass players.
Okay.
I've been doing that for 12 years,
Nice.
12, 13 years. I don't know if I move, when I move, I don't know if I'm going to come back for that. But
Okay.
I also interviewed over the spring for a position that just got, like, James Genus got the thing. But I made the short list. There was they narrowed it down to 6, and then I think they narrowed it down to 3, and I made the 6, and I actually interviewed. But as much as I love those guys and as much as I would love to do that job, at this point I couldn't see moving to Boston or like commuting from here.
Right.
I got a weird feeling about it, and it was one of those feelings that was like, this is great, but this is not the right time.
Right, yeah. Do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think also Berkeley's changed a lot since we were there because they're playing hardball with the internet. They're getting all the people that people would want to study with to get enrollment. It's like you got Victor Wooten that's there on the regular, John Patitucci.
See, that blows my mind that those guys are, and they're like on campus there, like you walking around running into Victor. Because I remember Victor coming to do a clinic, and it was like people were, fainting in the streets, right. And
so
now
he's like,
and now here's like Steve Bailey is like the chairman now, right?
He's the chair, yeah.
It blows me away.
Yeah.
Not to knock. Danny Moe and John Rapucci and Whit Brown and all those guys who I still love.
Yeah, the old guard did a lot at that place.
Well,
and they still do. They still do. I mean, but
I think they pretty much designed the curriculum, for lack of a better description. I mean, what bass education was, because I was coming from music and art, which was across the street from Lincoln Center, and this was right when Wynton Marsalis was starting up his whole jazz at Lincoln Center vibe.
Was it a lot of jazz snobbery?
It was just like
that?
The electric bass is not a real instrument.
Oh.
And you should be playing the upright and all this kind of nonsense. But then once I got to Berkeley, and here's like teachers who are strictly electric players. They're not upright players who were just doing me a favor for the first time. Yeah. So it was like an actual pedagogy. Am I pronouncing that word correctly?
I think so, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's, and I could actually study and thrive in an environment that saw my instrument as something valid. Yeah. So I'm always indebted to those guys. So who were some of your teachers at Berkeley that made the impact on you?
I stayed with Bruce Gertz most of the time.
Okay.
I guess at that point I wanted to learn the kind of stuff that he's renowned for teaching. Like my background's weird because it's like I've done a lot of stuff I guess people would consider on some level like jazz-ish, but I'm not a jazz musician, man. Like I'm not one of those. I know like 600 standards. Like I can speak, I like improvisation and I want to know harmony.
Right.
I would say I'm more like a funk or a rock bass player that has like funk leanings and can understand like more advanced harmony.
I think when people hear advanced harmony and improvisation, jazz is the term that they use as like a catch-all for that.
But then I think of bass players I really dig that I know grasp those concepts in their own way, like a Scott Toon is like on Zappa's music. And I think he's like one of the most amazing players ever. And just because. But I like the fact that he doesn't really sound like he went to school either. And I think that's something that I care more about than I used to. Because I think at this point, there's a rawness with people. And then there's a point where stuff just gets really sterile. And I like hearing people play well and what have you. But I also feel like there's I don't know.
There's got to be a little bit of imperfection.
Yeah. And I think also now... And I've been saying this for a while. This is a conversation I have with a lot of people because I play music with a lot of people that definitely have technical areas of their instrument figured out or they're honed into it and they can do like quote unquote amazing things with it. But they also can write songs. Like I play with Vernon Reid quite a bit. Yeah. When he doesn't do, Living Color stuff, like we've been playing together since like 2005 and he's on my last record. And the one thing that we talk about a lot is like analog instruments have sort of reached their peak level in a way. Like a lot of the innovations that have happened as far as playing the instrument, like for the most part, they're kind of set in a way. Like there might be something that comes out that can play faster, or they might have like more references to other instruments that they bring to their, but for the most part, like we've hit peak bass guitar, we've hit peak drums, and we've hit peak
That's interesting.
guitar. But because I feel like in a weird way, it's not that people that pursue that stuff are shallow, but I really think it's about the writing. Like it's about the writing and the composition and the tunes. It's not.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Like that's going back to why I think Prince really affected me. It's like, well, here's someone who can. It's a fine line. You straddle the line between like, okay, there's high level of musicianship, not just like, oh, that was sort of a cool solo.
Yeah.
It's like, no, this dude shreds, but there's like a ton of stuff going on or not going on, and he knows how to distill it down to its like to the essence of a pop song. But he's definitely one of those musicians that listened to all that stuff and was an avid jazz fan, and
that's right.
And I feel like that's what makes a band like Van Halen great, because it's like you have like this sophisticated thing on one level, but then it's just like they're just kind of a bar band, That's
right. Well, that's the
in the nicest, like in an endearing way.
Absolutely. But to your point about the analog instruments reaching their peak. I mean, I was watching the it's a Jimi Hendrix documentary that came out in like '73 or something, and they're showing like, was it the Monterey Pop set? What was the show where he lit the guitar on fire? Was that Monterey Pop?
I think it was Monterey.
Okay. And, besides all like the setting the guitar on fire and humping the amp and everything, I was thinking to myself, man, no one had ever like bent a note up on a Strat and held it for that long with feedback. Yeah. Nobody had ever done that before. And I can't imagine what it must have been like in 1966.
Yeah.
To, where like the peak of Stratocaster guitar playing was Eric Clapton.
Right.
Who's great.
Right.
Who's the greatest. But no one had ever like made the machine make that sound before.
Yeah.
But what made it work was the tunes were cool. So the setting and the context for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Is what also makes it cool.
Yeah, I think the intent has a lot to do with it. I think I know people that definitely Jocko didn't reach them through Weather Report or Pat Metheny. He reached them through Joni Mitchell's music.
Right.
Because for whatever reason, those tunes were like a perfect foil for what he was doing on bass.
Right.
And I totally see that for why that would affect people that way. But yeah, I don't know. Like I was saying, I fell into that trap for a while. Like of
just being impressive for its own sake.
Well, it's like the chops culture thing.
Well, yeah.
And now I think I'm grateful that I did it, but I'm grateful that I also got my ass kicked when I started playing with people that like I really admired. Like people that would tell me.
This is while you're still at Berkeley or after?
This is after.
Okay.
Like so I've had kind of some cool experiences in that, like that thing where you end up playing with people you admired. And I've had that happen a lot. Like knock on wood, it's been like a great thing. But one of my favorite musicians and actually one of my favorite people. Like we've had our ups and downs, but I played with this guitar player for 5 years in two different bands. He had this guy, Dave Fuszynski.
Sure. Screaming Headless.
Yeah, so I did Screaming
Headless. Freedom Bremner, the singer?
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine as well.
Cool, yeah. Freedom's cool. I did that for a while when Freedom was singing, and then for a little bit when they resurrected the band with Dean was still in the band, the original, or the singer that when they got signed in '95, who was on those albums.
Right.
So I did some stuff with that, and then I also played in a trio with Fuszynski. And that's where I feel like I was able to put my mark on some of his music. Like we played these tunes down and road tested them, and we have like a cool album in the show for it.
Right.
But Fuse was very much he would always get on me about stuff I would do.
Like what?
In
What
my
was
solo.
it?
Just
Okay.
like playing too many notes when there didn't need
Okay.
to be any.
Okay.
And like kind of saying, you know, look, you play really great lyrical things. That's your star player. Don't
Yeah.
bench your star player. You don't need to play 50 notes if you can do it with 5.
Sure.
And of course, I'm like, well, I want to, you know, it's fun to play a lot of notes. And, and that's not, you know, like, I think the thing is, like, that's not really art. And I think, you know, I had to grow up a little bit as a musician in someone's band. Because that's the thing. I mean, people, you know, I have, like, friends that have done gigs where, you know, they've played with like guitar players that insist that they play the fills on their records. Like one of my friends, I'm not going to name his name or say
Okay.
when this happened, but
Right.
he was doing some stuff with Yngwie.
Okay.
God help him. And I was going to say God rest his soul, but no, he's still here.
No, he's
He's still here. No, Yngwie's awesome, man, because he owns what he does. That's
right.
That's
That's
his
exactly
thing, man.
right.
He kills at it.
right.
But
the fact that you can drop his name
Yeah.
as it's almost like a noun
Yeah.
to describe a certain thing,
Yeah.
and you go, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
But and in any case,
So Yngwie wanted him to play the fill as recorded, and this dude who's a younger drummer was like, "Look, man, I can play a better fill than that. That would set it up." And you know, and
Yeah.
he's not trying to hear that.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, there's this perception with creative music where it's like, you know, like you can kind of do whatever you want and you have free reign. But I think a lot of times people call people because they want specific things from them. And it's
Right.
like if what Fuse liked about my bass playing had to do with having some lyrical ideas that hit him a certain way and that's what he wants to hear with his music, that doesn't mean he's trying to shut me down as a musician.
right.
I mean, there's other instances though where it's like I'm a lot less lenient now with sessions where it's like I'll maybe take some suggestions and be kind of like, oh, sure, whatever you want. But then there's a
Right.
point where I'm like, you might want to try someone else because you
Right.
wanted me to do it. This is what I'm hearing.
This is what right.
yeah.
Right.
Because I think
Yeah.
if you give too much room on that, people take the proverbial mile.
Yeah.
And then you're on something you're not that happy with.
and it doesn't even sound like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
this is stuff where I'm talking more about music where it's not like it's just like the craftsmanship of playing or the craftspersonship of playing an instrument. This is more like, here, do your thing. And, you know, but like you do your thing.
Well, you would hope that you get the call because they want you.
Yeah.
I remember doing a demo project in Boston before I came back to New York, and the guy, I'm in the control room with the dude, like, you know, basically putting my bass tracks onto stuff that already existed. And the dude was like hovering over me the whole time.
Yeah.
And we're going in and we're punching like a bar at a time, a phrase at a time. And I got the finished thing back, and it didn't even sound like me.
Yeah.
I was really convinced that he'd gone in and re-recorded everything himself. That's how not like me it sounded.
Yeah.
You know, and like you say, now I'm way less lenient about that stuff. Like, look, I have a kid. If I'm getting up and leaving my house to come to do your session, and you want some, you know, anybody, call someone else.
Yeah.
Unless you're paying me a shit ton of money, then I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
But hopefully you're getting called to bring your personality to the thing.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, at this point I deal with that on a case by case basis because every situation's different, or they want like some kind of a balance. I'm happy to,
Right.
you know, serve a larger vision,
Yeah.
but I don't like you said, I don't like being stifled.
Well, if it's
but-
presented in a way, yeah, I agree with that. If it's presented in a way where it's like, well, we want you to base what you do off of this thing, this guide track, that's cool. I mean, if people are kind of upfront about what you're being called in for, it's cool. But I think it's hard when people don't know what they want from you, but it's encoded in phrases like, well, do your thing. And they're like, well,
Right.
I just did it 5 different ways. And
Right.
none of it's good for you.
Just play, man. We'll let you know when we have
Yeah.
what we need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just that doesn't happen to me so often, but a lot of times, like I remember when I finally decided I was going to like toe that line because I just got tired. You know, I don't think it benefits anybody.
So this is like after like a couple of years in New York, or this is you're talking about experiences in New York or prior to that?
Just
in Boston?
overall.
Okay.
Just overall.
Okay.
Like once, feel like once I got a better sense of who I was musically, which I actually think happened while I was here.
Okay.
Because I think like a lot of musicians who study their instrument and they're serious about what they're doing. I mean, I think I definitely sounded like a lot of the people I liked when I got here. And then,
which was who?
Well, I was coming kind of out of like a fusion thing, more so than I might care to admit now. But I mean, I'm pretty transparent, man. Like it's one of those things. Like I think I was pretty enamored with like Matt Garrison and his playing. And when I got to Berkeley, a lot of people were like, oh man, like Matt. Like when I got there, I wanted to know like who's the king of the hill,
right?
And that's not really a great mentality to have either. But I was younger. I was like 17 when I went.
Sure.
So I want to know, I was like, who's the big dog in the yard?
Right.
Like and I think people also were like, what does that mean? But the name I kept hearing a lot of was Matt Garrison.
Yeah. And
I guess to a certain extent, I didn't understand that Matt is very much his own bass player, and he's a very singular type of, it's not that everybody sounds like that. He's very unique.
I mean, so it's one thing to want to align yourself with someone that you look at as like the hot guy,
right,
the top guy, and be around that.
Sure.
But if he's completely forging his own path, maybe there's things you can learn from him, the way he carries himself, but maybe you don't want to cop exactly what he's doing. I used to see that a lot at Berkeley too, like guys who were just, trailing the hot guy.
Yeah. Well, I knew like at least 4 or 5 guitar players that sounded like Wayne Krantz for a certain point in their development. And I think that's, but I think the thing is, like, if people are really being true to what a guy like Wayne or a guy like Matt is doing, and Matt was really into Schooley, man, like Schooley's Ferris, and that guy was like at Berkeley, and that was sort of the thing for him that made him pursue the direction he went in, because Schooley had all that stuff, like the really nice melodies and the chordal playing.
Right.
But as much as I was into Matt, I also really liked, like, one of my mentors that I studied with briefly before I went to college was Dave Dyson, who I actually, so here's like the weird "this is your life" moment for me. It was like, because I was kind of a nerd about this shit. Like I would read Bass Player magazine and like I'd read all the articles, like just to, because that's how much I want to know about. I was like, I want to read about all these people.
When that magazine came out, man, I soaked it up like a sponge. I knew all those names.
So Dave played bass with New Kids on the Block. He was like their musical director.
Right.
So in 1993, Living Colour was doing an in-store appearance at this record store in Georgetown, which is a part of DC.
Right.
And,
right.
So they, me and some friends from high school went because we were like huge fans and wanted to get like stuff signed.
Sure.
Because at that point I cared about shit like that. And I noticed like, because Dave, I think, went to school with Will Calhoun. They were in Berkeley at the same time.
Right.
So he was hanging with Will, but I recognized him, and so I started talking to him because I had done that 5-week thing, and I'd met a bunch of people who I think Anthony Vitti was like around when they were at the same time, like they were sort of classmates.
I remember when he came on the scene at Berkeley.
So I was trying to meet people that were doing it, and so I bugged Dyson like for a card so I could get lessons from him, and I don't even think he wanted to teach, but I think I just bothered him. And it was cool because he heard what I was doing and he heard some stuff there, and he was like a really good ally for me, and he was really gentle with his notes. Like he wasn't super, this sucks, blah blah blah. Like I'd work on something and he'd say, well, your feel's good, but here's like a couple albums you should check out, and it'd be like Bootsy Collins, and then there's that Donald Blackman album that everyone listens to called Blackman, which has like Dennis Chambers.
Right.
There's like this bass player, I think his name is Barry Son Johnson. They're like Queens cats, but it's like amazing funk stuff and just amazing lines. And he got me into Larry Graham and checking out like some of the Graham Central Station stuff like Pow and Earthquake. And so I mean, I definitely came from like a groove based concept with bass playing, but I wanted to get more into the stuff that Matt was doing. Okay. But I think in a weird way, having that balance in equal parts, and probably it leans more towards the groove thing.
Sure.
that is what helped me with a lot of the musicians I ended up playing with, because Fuzinski wants people in his bands that can play grooves and then stretch out. And it just seemed like, you know, a lot of the music I was influenced by the time I got to high school and was a serious musician, it's weird and strange that I ended up playing music with Vernon Reid, but it's also kind of not, because Living Colour, to me, that was like what the future of rock music was going to sound like. I thought that's what rock was going to be.
Dude, that's exactly how I felt about it. The first time I heard that, I remember I was a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And, you know, going to high school in Manhattan in the 80s at that time, it sounded like, it was like Back to the Future.
Yeah.
It really felt like that to me. That opening riff to Cult of Personality changed everything.
Yeah.
And these guys are from New York.
Right. They wrote Cult of Personality in a rehearsal studio in Bushwick.
Really?
So they were pre-hipsters before. Yeah. That's right. It's weird because I've fanboyed a couple times.
Oh yeah.
More than a couple times when like we've been on the road, and Vernon's always been very kind about that. Like,
yeah.
You know, he's always like, there was one time I like picked up his guitar and played like Middleman, and then he shot me looking and put it down. Because, you know, it's cool because
he probably gets that all the time.
Yeah.
But not from guys who can play.
Yeah. That's one instance where, you know, there's that thing people say, like, don't meet your heroes. And in my
case by case basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Vernon's very cool. He's one of my favorite people. I'd say he's one of my best friends. Like,
nice.
But
how did you hook up with him?
I met him through Fuzinski.
Oh, okay.
I was still hanging around Boston for I was actually going to move to New York in 2003 without going so far into this, because it's not, you know, I don't want to be a downer, but like my father got sick and passed away.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
That's cool. It was the end of 2003.
Okay.
And I guess I just felt like I wasn't ready to uproot my life.
Okay.
I mean, I did it probably like 10 months after.
Okay.
But I guess I felt like
you hesitated because you were dealing with that. Okay.
Yeah, or I felt like I want to kind of stay in an area that's like pretty familiar, and I was living in a house with a bunch of friends, and I felt pretty supported there. So,
right.
So I didn't fall too deep into like a dark kind of like whatever. Like I was able to stay somewhat even keel.
But at the same time, it's just like, how about one life-altering event at a time?
Yeah.
You know,
moving to New York would have been hard. And I think even when I moved to New York, there was a lot of that still. Like there was a lot of residual stuff from that. But I think because when I moved to New York, I had stuff on the calendar. Like I had my first tour with the Torsos lined up for early 2005.
All right.
My first solo album had come out in 2004. So that's the thing that I think is sort of ironically what really started my career. And that's how I met Vernon, because in 2002, I wrote a bunch of tunes, and I just decided maybe it would be smart to record this stuff and call people I wanted to have play on it and just see if I could do it.
Okay.
And so Screaming Hellish Torsos was doing a thing at Berkeley Performance Center, and Fuse was there. A couple of my friends had played with him when he was in Michelle Deggiocello's band that had been playing with Michelle, and then she had just flipped her band. So it wasn't those musicians anymore, but that was my end to talk to him, because I was like, well, if I drop some names that he knows, and maybe at least I can get him to talk to me. Right. So I said, hey man, you know, I'm doing this thing, and like, I really think you'd be the right guitar player for these tracks, because it'll give it a slant that it wouldn't have if it was somebody else.
Sure.
And he was like, cool, well, send me what they sound like and we'll talk. And he totally was into it. And so I had him play on it, and I guess he liked my playing enough that's how I ended up getting calls to do his stuff. Right. I didn't think about doing that. I just wanted him to play on my record. But it's sort of, strangely enough, like that's kind of what happened. And then I guess Vernon, because Fuse teaches at Berkeley now, Vernon was doing a thing for Guitar Week, and he was going to play, and he was going to do like a concert, and he wanted a good band, so he deferred to Fuzinski and Fuse. It was like myself on bass, Nikki Glaspie was playing drums. Okay. She played in Dumpster Funk for a while, and she was in Beyonce's band with Kim Thomas when she had the two drummers. Right, okay. Now she has a great band called the Nth Power, but she's an amazing drummer, man. And a great person. I love her. Nice. So yeah, we played with Vernon, and we did a bunch of different tunes.
Like on this one-off thing that he was doing. Okay.
And then, I told Vernon, hey, man, I'm moving to New York in a couple months. He's like, cool. So we stayed in touch, and Vernon's bass player and his, like, he has a band called Mask, and I ended up taking over.
Melvin Gibbs, the bass player in that?
Melvin's was the bass player in this other thing.
Okay.
Because those guys have history from playing with Ronald Shannon Jackson.
Sure.
But Hank Schroy was the guy in Mask. Like,
okay.
So Hank couldn't or didn't want to do this thing in Brazil. So it was like a last minute, hey, can you do a trip to Brazil? And I still had a vehicle in the city, and I just had to like repair something. And I was like, yes, I can.
Nice.
And so I went and did this thing, and that's sort of what got that ball rolling. Like, Vernon called me for stuff, and I've done a bunch of traveling and stuff over the past 12 years. And
so when you're out with him, he's appearing as Vernon Reid as his own thing, or is it?
That's how it's been.
Okay.
It's been like trio stuff the past few times. Like, we haven't done anything in a while because Living Colour's been fairly
busy.
active.
I follow all of those guys on Instagram.
Yeah.
Individually and Living Colour collectively.
Yeah.
So like there'll be times where it's like stage photos from all four of those guys and the official Living Colour.
Yeah.
And it warms my heart to see that those guys are still out there kicking ass.
They're still really great live, man.
And they sound great, and they look good.
Yeah.
And it's just as vital as they were then. It really makes me happy to see that. But when they're not out, Vernon's doing just Vernon Reid.
Yeah.
And what does he play? What tunes are you guys doing?
It's a mix of things. Like, there's instrumental things that are he does like weird takes on like Monk songs. There's like interesting stuff that's more kind of like John McLaughlin-esque type things.
Okay.
Some of the stuff has like more of a rockish edge to it. It also depends on like who the rhythm section is. Like, for a couple gigs we had Gene Lake, who I've done a lot of playing with, for some of his music, and then lately it's been this drummer Dana Hawkins, who's like a great drummer and a great bass player. He's one of those guys where you're just glad that he's your friend and not your enemy. he plays really good bass. There's a couple guys like that. A couple people I know that are like stellar on both. Yeah. And I'm friends with all of them, which is good.
Yeah.
I'm not that great on drums. I can program drums really well, but so we do some stuff that's he does some interesting covers. Like he has a version of Enjoy the Silence, the Depeche Mode song.
Huh. Okay.
We did like a My Bloody Valentine song once, which was cool. But he also has interesting stuff that he writes. And it's not necessarily 21-minute power jam type stuff. It's more rooted in rock stuff. But it's fun. Sometimes it's loose, but when it's a well put together set, like it's pretty great. Nice. It's cool to hear him play in that context. And then sometimes we'll do blues stuff and he kills on that, and then we'll do like some Hendrix stuff and he's pretty great on that too. Sure. So there's that whole thing. But
you do a lot of stuff overseas or here in the States, or what is it?
That's how it's been.
Okay.
Mostly it's been like Europe and South America.
How long is it a run with him usually?
It's been a while. The last for when it was really we were doing a lot of stuff, it was like a month at a time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like 4 weeks. And it was like European type stuff. And then there's been weird hybrids where there was one interesting tour I did where it was him, Cindy Blackman, and this great guitar player named Aurelian, who's this French cat. And I'm afraid to say his last name because I've known him for years and I feel like I still mispronounce it. But I think it's Aurelian Budinek. That's his, if you see it, it'll make sense. But he's like a great guitar player. He does a lot of Broadway stuff too. But he kind of makes the rounds. He's like a good utility guitar player. He can he's got his own thing, but he can do a lot. And so it was cool to have a band where it was those two guys and Cindy on drums.
Nice.
It was fun.
Radio 418.
This brings me to the sort of general question that I wanted to ask, because I'm looking at the list of names that are associated with you. Vernon Reid, The Roots, Torsos, Terry Lynn Carrington, John Schofield, John Medeski. What do you call what you do? Like when you're a musician, what kind of music do you play?
Right.
How do you answer that question? Because like we were saying before, it's not jazz, but it's not funk either. And I know you do like stuff with effects. And what kind of musician do you consider yourself to be?
I mean, if I had to sum it up, I would just say like a funk and jazz informed rock musician.
Okay.
But
like, is there a term to describe like what Vernon does or what Fuse does? I mean, is there? It's because I don't travel in that world at all. I observe it from afar, and I enjoy what I hear. What do you call that, though?
I think it's tough because the words that would be the most obvious terms evoke other things. So it'd be easy to say someone's a fusion musician because they have all these different things that are fused together.
Right.
But
The
a lot
definition
of times,
of fusion.
yeah, but it's very pejorative because what people associate that with is people that don't play songs, they play tunes. And there's a difference between playing songs and playing tunes.
Right. I mean, I would hesitate to use the term fusion to describe like Screaming Headless Torsos.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like, how do you? Yeah. So is there a catch-all term for this the ecosystem that you're in?
I mean, the other word that comes to mind is progressive, but then that evokes like 37-minute power jams with like multi-movements.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think of yourself as living in a specific world musically?
No, I mean, because I think there's definitely things people associate with me, but and I definitely think some of that's my own doing, but I do think that I think at the heart and soul of it, like I'm just a groove bass player that understands like different rhythms and understands different harmony. And I would say it's easy for me to fall in line with someone who plays drums like Gene Lake or someone like Keith Carlock or, someone that does none of that stuff, that just plays like funk stuff like Adam Deitch. Like I find it easy to communicate with each of those types of drummers. When I played with Cindy, I love her. It was an interesting thing for me because I don't come from like that loose jazz thing. I'm very much a grid kind of person. Like, so we're playing time, and if you're going to mess with the time, you're relating it to a grid. It's not this free, kind of stretchy thing. And that was a bit of an adjustment.
The rotary perception that Mingus talked about, right?
Yeah. And it wasn't bad. It was just something I had to get used to, and to a certain extent, I just kind of had to like not think about it, because when I did think about it, it would mess it up.
You find yourself listening to where everyone else is in relation to it.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also, I also think because of being like so many other musicians interested in production, and also like everyone I know had very much been profoundly affected by the Voodoo album that D'Angelo made, where the time, like there's like weird flams going on, and the time feels like completely amazing, and I
had trouble listening to that stuff for a long time.
Yeah,
he does a little bit of it on Brown Sugar.
Yeah,
and then I started hearing tracks from Voodoo, and I was like, whoa, like everything is so far behind the beat. It took me a while to get used to that.
It's an amazing thing, but I definitely even that, it's referencing a grid. The little parts that flam with each other, they're also circling around each other. And I'm really into rhythm. Yeah. So I think like ultimately that's what makes it difficult, because tonally I can get a few different sounds. Like I can do I don't mean this in like a kind of like a sleazy, like let's make a deal kind of, but I can do the flat wounds P bass thing pretty comfortably.
Sure.
I'm not known for that.
Right.
But, like I play one a lot. Like I've taken, like even when I'm like home practicing or working on stuff, like sometimes I'll grab that bass because it's not what I always use. And I can totally get into the spirit of what that sound evokes. But I can, I can play with a pick to a certain extent. Like there's certain things I can't do. Like I'm not as fluent with a pick as I am with my fingers, but I can get a pretty good metal sound. I can get a pretty good rock sound. So I don't know. Like I think I've let my interests as a listener inform my playing and help fill in some of the gaps.
Okay.
I don't know. Like, I mean, there's always like funny terms that I would say about my play, like definitely not a Latin bass
Right,
player.
you're not allowed. Right.
Yeah, but
right,
like that doesn't
right.
say shit. That doesn't tell you anything.
Well, just because I found myself like telling Jill when, oh yeah, this guy's coming over, we're going to talk. Oh yeah, who's that? Yeah, Steve Jenkins. He's a. And I was like,
plays
how
weird
do I?
music.
What do I describe? How do I describe him?
Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering, are we living in a time where it's sort of like almost irrelevant
I think so.
to be, you know, because you're just, you know, we're all musicians and we're all in the
Yeah.
same kind of like what we were saying before about knocking the fusion thing or
Yeah.
knocking Yngwie or whatever. It's
Yeah.
all, there's really room for everything at
Yeah.
this point.
I think when people see like the pure uncut versions of stuff that maybe the lesser versions of it might not be as good.
Right.
I think that's the thing. Like people just have to witness what the actual thing was because I think if someone hears like a third or fourth generation, let's call it like a not like a copy, but let's say people have tried to assimilate something and it's not really. It loses the impact of what the original thing was.
The thing
like,
that they were, taking it from.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure seeing Mahavishnu Orchestra when they were firing on all cylinders was probably like a sight to behold.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that music lives the best in the live setting. It's not maybe
Right.
necessarily the studio records.
I think you're right about that.
I think it's like you go in there. I mean, like here's the other thing too, and I don't know if this is bullshit or not, but there was like a record store I used to shop at, and this is what I guess not
Where, in Boston or New York?
in DC.
Okay.
When I was first getting into like fusion music and,
All right.
and like I was like looking for records that I'd never heard of, like Metal Fatigue by Alan Holdsworth and Jocko's second record, like
Right.
Word of Mouth.
Yeah.
There was this he wasn't even an old guy, but he was a knowledgeable dude that had listened to a lot of jazz and fusion stuff. And
Okay.
I don't know, he told these stories. And I remember one time he was like, yeah, I saw Mahavishnu when they opened for Yes. And as soon as they got done, everyone left the arena. And I'm sure that's total bullshit. Like, I'm sure they just went outside and then got their seats. But
Nobody went to see Mahavishnu in Yes and then skipped out on Yes.
yeah.
I want to ask you about the teaching. Like, what makes a successful music teacher?
Well, I think
What do you strive for as a teacher?
my goals are just to help people feel comfortable with their ideas as musicians. And maybe what I try to do more than anything is teach people how to extract information from things that they transcribe or things that capture their interest and turn it into something that they can use for themselves.
Nice.
And it doesn't even have to be like an obvious thing, like a technical thing. It could be like certain things that have to do with like note selections or like a phrasing thing, like the rhythm of something. But I think what I try to do is, my feeling is like giving people a sort of like an on-ramp to getting to what they're trying to achieve for themselves. What ends up happening though, it's easy to say all that. I think a lot of times people don't know what they're trying to do.
Right.
And I think it comes down to, I don't ask people to tell me what they think their concept is about playing bass or what,
Right.
but I get people to think about it. Like I think it comes down to trying to help people figure out what they're about, like what their value system is.
Yeah, that takes time sometimes too, because you got to get to know the person.
Yeah, right. But I don't have like a real dogmatic kind of thing that I push on people. The other thing is I get people that want to learn specific things from me, and sometimes it's me almost like giving a therapy session. Like, here's why I did this. You don't have to do this.
Right.
But,
right.
This is why I chose this route.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a really great bass player, and I know he spent a lot of time practicing, but he also spent a lot of time just playing and going for stuff. I was way more measured and much more cerebral about the whole thing.
Huh.
And I was more into, I think, and the thing is, I think a lot of times our backgrounds and experience as kids influence the types of decisions we make going towards becoming an adult, I had weird, I had a pretty okay time in school. Like I had friends and stuff, but
Yeah.
like when I was in middle school, some weird shit happened, as it does, man. And for a while I felt like I had nobody.
Sure.
And I felt like that was kind of when I started getting really serious about music, and like in comic book terms, this would be like my origin story. But I really think
Right.
what happened was I wanted to get so good at playing that it's like, all right, you can hate my guts, but you can't tell me that I suck.
That's right.
And I think
that was my story too.
yeah, I think that's kind of the way I approached it. But I think I had to go and do some work on that because I felt like you can kind of tell people who, like, here's what I realized.
Yeah.
When I got to school and I started meeting more musicians, you got people that just went to church or they did things in their community, and music was a communal thing.
Right.
It was never about them. It was always about like the people that they made it with.
It was in service to something else bigger.
Yeah. But then you got people that are like, all right, I'm basically, Tony Stark over here. Like I'm mad at the world. I got shit to work out.
Right.
And I really tried hard to learn this instrument.
Right.
And now I'm trying to do something with it. And I think that kind of has to be curtailed. And I'm not like religious at all, man, but I do think that like that type of mentality, the communal thing, I think about that more than I used to.
And being of service to it.
Yeah.
You find lately that, as I have done, I've noticed lately, you get on a gig, whether it's in a bar gig doing covers or whatever it is, and you meet some new players, and within an hour you've figured out this guy's like deepest problems. Just because of the way he carries him, it's because of the way he carries himself on the gig and the way they play. They're either being motivated by something genuine or something that's, like you don't seem to be motivated by anything that's unwholesome or unhealthy.
No.
Everything you do seems to come from a really honest place and a very creative place.
I try. Yeah.
Did it take a while to get to that point?
I think so.
Okay.
I talk about this with other friends of mine who are in the business that aren't necessarily bass players. Like one of my best friends in the world he's a techno musician, so he makes tracks, and then he also does what they do for performing is like they play these huge rooms and they DJ, but they arrange their tracks and there's work that goes into it, and it's not just hitting the space bar.
Right.
Maybe for some guys it is, but we were just talking about how essentially there's the game of this profession where people are, I think we were also talking about just in general the way society is now, and I don't want to get so into this, but like I think there's sort of a level that people it's not that their expectations are lower, but I don't expect that everyone's always going to be like the most righteous thing all the time, and it's not their fault. Like it's a byproduct of what happens. Like I got fired from a gig once, and I know for a fact, like I was talking to a peer about it, and they're like, "Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that, bro." And as soon as they hung up with me, guess who they called?
No shit.
Yeah, and I'm not mad at them because I
you can't be mad at them, right?
Yeah, this is just how it goes.
Yeah,
and I think by and large, it's like like reading about, for example, like I don't particularly like this because I feel like it is sort of sacrilegious to me, but like the fact that Kiss has other guys wearing Ace and Peter's makeup, I'm like, that's not cool, but I understand they run a business.
Right.
And Eric Singer is a great drummer, and I agree with him. He's like, look, if I don't do this, someone else will. Like, this is a gig, man. Like, I'm doing this. This isn't like about me trying to slight Kiss fans who were a fan of the band in the 70s. This is about, like
the things that we used to hold as sacred are suddenly like not so sacred.
Yeah.
Like, what would you do in that position?
Yeah, I think there's a very small list of people I would maybe expect to operate like that, and the rest, it's like, no, I get it. This is just how it is.
Right.
It's not personal. It's not one of those things that like it's not about me. It's not about me.
Right.
So I think there's that kind of stuff, but I'm cognizant of it because it's definitely the kind of thing where it's like, I don't know. Like I've definitely dated girls, and then I've met their friends, and they've been a little too friendly, and it's like, oh, you're, like that's, and I just think we're in a weird competitive society, man, and I think that's like kind of the part that sucks about it. There's not, It's
an interesting. We live in a day and age where it's people are striving to have the next thing and the best thing.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get down on yourself if you're not keeping up with everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I replaced something on someone once, and I won't say what it was or who it was, but like I heard from him about it, and it was definitely, I understood where the pain was, and
But did you move in on his gig and take
No.
it from him?
No.
So that had nothing to do with you.
Yeah, no. I let him vent, man, because it was one of those things where it's like, all right, I understand this sucks, but it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not really going to apologize for being the one, but I'll apologize that this is a shitty predicament.
Right.
But, there's a short list for some of the things that people do, and, that's just how it is. That's what happens with everything. So, I don't know. Like I think that's kind of the thing that I've tried to sort of like not think so much about, because I think by and large it's like trying to enjoy stuff in the moment is like that's mostly where my head's at now. Like I try to enjoy stuff and
and do good work every time.
Right.
Because life is short, man, and everything is so fragile. If like we're blessed to be able to do what we do something we love, do something we're good at, if we're gonna treat it like we're in a boardroom somewhere,
right?
What's the point of all the hassle that we have to go through to maintain this thing? You might as well have fun at it.
You know? I don't think it really works so well when it is about holding on to all that stuff. I think it's just it kind of clouds everything, and it's not fun. Yeah. And I feel bad for the people. Like so here's something I tell my students, and this is probably like ass backward advice. And I am gonna write a book. It is gonna come out. Like I have a title, but I'm not sure if that's the final title. I am gonna work on it, but. Yeah. I tell a lot of my students, like, don't try to be like the best bass player. Just try to be really fucking good.
Right.
Because the best people put them on a pedestal and they got all this pressure. Right. You're just really fucking good. You can hang out and like watch the other people who are amazing sweat.
That's right.
You're like, well, I'm not amazing, but I'm really fucking good.
And good every time. So what is next for you? What's the from here? Oh, when you get to LA, what was this? You have stuff lined up, or you're just jumping in and gonna?
Yeah.
Do you know people out there?
Oh yeah. Okay. I have a lot of my friends I went to school with, and there's people from here that have migrated out there.
Okay.
When I moved to New York, I had a very big list of I'm gonna do this, and that, and I found it made me really unhappy.
What made you doing those things, or having the list?
Having the list.
Huh.
Because I felt like there's an element to all this that's based on chance, and you can't really like preordain stuff, and then you can't will things to happen that aren't meant to happen. Like I'm not one of those people that's going to talk about like fate and stuff like that, but I do think people can only do what they can do. Like if you don't hit it off with someone that might be in a position to put you on in your career, that doesn't mean you fucked your career up. It just meant that maybe you didn't hit it off with somebody.
Right.
I can't say that happened to me. I do have friends, or not friends, but people I went to school with that have since gone on to be like really successful. And it's not that we have bad blood, but it's like we weren't necessarily cool with each other in music school. So it's like one of those things where it's like I'd have to talk to this person for a while and see like where but there's not like any bad blood. It's just like, hey, I was kind of an asshole to you when I was 17 because
and now I'm hitting you up because you're Mr. Man. I got a few of those, but I wish I'd been nicer to him, or I wish I'd been closer friends with him or something.
I feel that way, but then I feel like, well, sometimes you just have to accept that that's the way, that's where the ball lands on. I don't play golf, but that's where the ball lands on the fairway. You just got to play it from where it lands, and that's it. When you're 17, you're 17.
Well, you also can't hold yourself at 41 or 44 getting pissed at 17-year-old you for decisions that they made that like the younger version of you didn't know that stuff then.
Right.
You made the best decision that you knew how to make at that time.
You have to give that version of yourself a pass.
Totally.
I just think by and large, the idea of going, like, I guess I've always been kind of frightened by the idea of taking my hands off the wheel. It's been an interesting year because there's been stuff that, like, there was that position, that teaching position I interviewed for that would be cool on some level at some point, but now wouldn't be that time.
Okay.
I did some other stuff that I thought I wanted to do, and it didn't quite go the way I thought, but I did get to sort of have the experience, be like, well, I don't know if this is for me.
Right.
And I think it's important to do that stuff, but I think I'm pretty confident with, like, what I'm going to move out there with, like, my tools and my ability to, like, talk to people. And so I guess I should be fine, man. That's kind of, I'm not, but there's not.
And you
really
have a reputation and a, for lack of a better term, there's a brand, I think, that's associated with you. And,
I don't think I'm going to wear any less black when I go out to California. Probably just because it gets hot,
right.
And,
and there are also so many New York transplants out there, right?
Yeah. Like, so, I think I'm still going to have, like, sarcasm in my day-to-day observations. Totally. And that's, but, I do like, I like what that place offers from a lifestyle standpoint, but I think it also just depends on, like, what people want to do with themselves. I mean, New York's an amazing place, man, even with all the changes that have happened. But that's all cities. When I was out there,
that's true.
I spent a month on the West Coast. I was mostly in LA. Then I went to San Francisco to see some friends, and everyone I heard from in San Francisco kept saying, well, it's really different now. And I hear that in New York somewhat, and I feel it somewhat even in the 12-year window that I was here, because I also think it was a huge, profound amount of change that happened. Not to mention the financial crisis, but you had, like, the emergence of technology in a way that had never really been before.
That's right.
There's the whole thing about, like, the record stores closing, and just kind of the new way of doing things taking root, and
Bandcamp.
Yeah,
you just
all that
record
stuff.
Your shit and it's out. That's crazy.
Yeah, and what's weird though, and I'm not giving myself credit for this because I didn't know this, but what I guess gives me hope for whatever I decide to do, it's like, me and a couple other people I know had the foresight to make our own music and not follow I'm going to get a gig with someone, then I'll get permission to make my own record. I was just like, no, I'll make my own thing now, man. Who cares?
Right.
Like,
you have to.
And I mean, I forgot about that, and then I realized, well, you don't have to wait for a phone call to do something. It's completely
reversed from how it was in the 80s and in the 90s, when it was like, I'm going to go to New York and get the gig. And the idea that you can just put your stuff up on a thing where people all over the world can hear it overnight is just, if you were telling me this when you and I were at Berkeley, there's going to be this thing where you can just talk into your little communicator device live to people all over the world, we'd be like, the fuck, it's Star Trek, get out of here. It's crazy.
I bought the first flip phone I ever owned in Boston. And I remember the guy, it was at a Verizon store, or it was a Verizon kiosk in a Radio Shack.
Okay.
And he was watching, he was looking at his phone, and he had this kind of dumbfounded look on his face. and I was like, what are you watching there? And he's like, oh, this is video on the phone. And it was like the shittiest, most compressed.
Right, pixelated.
Yeah.
Right.
And this was like around 2002, I want to say.
Yeah.
And my assessment was, well, it's not quite ready yet. And at that point, who would have, I couldn't fathom watching something on a flip phone. It just seemed really far-fetched. But now it's, who would have thought that, like, the phone is like the hub for everything?
That's right.
It's like part tracking device, part global positioning systems, part I use it for rehearsals, like for when I wrote a lot of the tunes on my last record from using voice memos, and some of the stuff, even arrangement wise, like I would just find pieces that I thought would work together and create from
Put
that.
them together, sure.
It's very weird.
It's a very interesting time to be alive, isn't it?
Yeah, but
You know?
but yeah, if someone told me, like, if someone just walked into like a class I had in 1995 and said, "Hey, guess what? You know, we're just gonna look at our phones most of the time, and
Right.
you might not
Everything's
even
gonna be
talk
done
to
through
people."
there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, no physical media. So are you going to go out there and just like jumpstart a solo thing, or are you going to hook up with or do you even have a plan?
I don't have a real plan. I think I'd like to do a mix of things as a side man,
Okay.
but I will keep fostering my original stuff. I mean, this band I was talking about with Bob and Devin, the band right now is called Red Eyed Sinatra.
Right.
I don't think we'll be able to keep that band name, but
Okay.
so we'll probably come up with something better. It's just one of those things where like no one wants to call it like the Steve Jenkins, Bob Lanzetti, Devin Collins project.
Right.
It's just because like no one knows. I think it sounds cooler if it sounds like a band name.
Right.
There was
Absolutely.
there was also a playing thing I did this summer where I played with Alex Skolnick and this great drummer named Kenny Grohowski at Satriani's G4 camp.
Okay.
And that trio was awesome. Alex has a trio that's more of a jazz thing. This is sort of a one-shot, let's play with this lineup and see what happens. And it was awesome.
Right.
And I would really be sad if we didn't get to do that again. So I think I definitely want to try to make that happen. And if I have to be the one to sort of instigate it.
Yeah.
But Alex is kind of like Vernon in that, like, Testament. He still plays in Testament, and they have a new record.
He brings an audience and a sensibility built in.
But that was a great trio. Like, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
when you find yourself with an icon like that, whether it's Vernon or Alex, you find yourself having to sort of work around that, or are they usually just as comfortable like blending in with you?
Well, Vernon's such a cool guy, man.
Yeah.
And Alex too. Alex was very, very unassuming.
Yeah.
I mean, I think G4 was an instance where you have all these people who are guitar players.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of guitar hero worship, as it were.
Right.
But strangely enough, a lot of the people that were there are pretty down to earth. Like Joe Satriani, who I'd never met. Satriani actually watched us play. I didn't realize this until maybe the second to last song.
Yeah.
Because he was, he wasn't in my, he was like behind.
You couldn't see him, sure.
And this is a situation where I got to do my full range of stuff. Like I got to play solos, and he just had really nice things to say to me. And then he emailed me when the whole thing was over. I think he emailed everyone. He tried to like touch base with everybody that was there.
Right.
And there's a track on my latest record where the solo is kind of a homage to Holdsworth and Satriani, but it's bass. And it kind of sounds like baritone guitar. But no one's really sure if it's bass or not. So I emailed Satriani. I said, "Look, man, I want you to hear this thing. Like, this is just a sort of a homage to like what what I've heard you do, like because of the register and stuff."
Yeah.
And I sent him the link, and I often think sometimes people are so busy or because they're who they are, they don't have time.
Sure.
Got a notification that he bought my record off Bandcamp, which
Holy
I was like,
crap.
which I thought was kind of
nice.
Then he told me he really liked it. Like he like hit me back like a couple days later. He was like, "Yeah, man, your record's awesome." So
that's great.
It was cool to get that kind of thing, but it's also cool how down to earth he was. And then I told Beller, and Beller was like, "Oh yeah, he was like the third person to pre-order the last Aristocrats album. He's like very cool."
Right.
Vi is very cool, man. Like I didn't talk to him for a long time, but he was really gracious and nice.
Yeah.
I guess my point is like a lot of the way people would approach, it just depends on like how you approach somebody. Like obviously if someone was a kid that was into metal and they listened to Testament and then they saw that Alex left Testament to go to the new school and study jazz, and they're like, "Oh, well, I want to learn how to broaden my horizons as a musician."
Sure.
Like I'm sure there's people that could probably relate to that type of a trajectory as a musician, studying their craft. But those guys are super, super loose and laid back. And I think also because they travel so much, or everyone travels so much, nobody wants to make it hard. Like nobody wants it to be right, because we had limited time to rehearse.
You have limited time to rehearse, and also, like you say, travel. You have to be lean and efficient.
This is how people hurt themselves, or they check out early. It's like you just have to learn how to keep the engines from like overdoing
And just generally being positive. I'm convinced that Satriani is still thriving at what he does because he keeps up with what the young dudes are up to.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
You know?
You know, I don't know if it's the kind of thing where he still gets to have some anonymity, but I would imagine, you know, in certain areas, like people see him and they probably get really happy. You know, and I've seen Vernon, you know, do stuff that is sort of humbling, like where someone didn't know who he was. And, you know, it's not like they were the biggest band ever, but they won Grammys and stuff. And
big enough, yeah.
Someone from a certain age bracket would know who they were.
Right.
But I've seen him almost justifiably have a right to say, "Don't you know who I am?" And he just didn't do it. And he wasn't pissed about it. He just was like, "Hey, I'm trying to get in here. I'm supposed to be on this list, and these are people that I'm supposed to have with me on this list. We just need to figure it out." It wasn't like, you know,
he doesn't pull the trip.
Like, where are the rose petals and the, you know, none of that shit. Yeah.
All right. Well, I admire your boldness both in the work that you do and in this next step that you're taking, man. This is
Thanks, man.
Brass balls to just pick up and move to a completely, like, the other extreme from New York with only the vaguest of a plan.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best, and I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Radio 418.
Yeah, Steve Jenkins. He's in LA, crushing it out there, doing some great stuff. You want to go to stevejenkinsbass.com and check out what he's doing. Follow him on Twitter at SJBassPlayer. You can also go to stevejenkins.bandcamp.com to check out his music. Get yourself the coaxial flutter. It's killing. The website for the podcast is radio418.com. You can subscribe there, but you have to create an account with Podbean to do that. And if that's not how you roll, go to iTunes and subscribe there, Radio 418. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnMon, JONMON. Instagram, John Montagna. YouTube is youtube.com/JohnMontagnaMusic. But anything and everything you want to know about me and what I'm doing is on my website, johnmontagna.com. Thank you so much for listening to Radio 418. I will see you on the next one. Be well.